The 1975-76 Cleveland Cavaliers. They're one of the more forgotten underdog teams in NBA history. In the grand scheme of things, what they achieved might not matter to most people, but their surprising upset against a famous team in their first ever playoff appearance was the first truly great moment for the Cavs as a franchise. It's one of the most underrated examples of a team of misfits and guys with something to prove coming together and playing beautiful basketball against all odds. The head coach of this team was the Hall of Famer Bill Fitch. Fitch had actually given up his dream of coaching in the Big Ten to become the first ever head coach hired by the Cavs organization. Like most expansion teams, it took a while for the Cavs to find their footing. That inaugural 70-71 season saw the Cavs finish with a 15-67 record. In 1972, they finished with 23 wins. In 1973, they had 32 wins. 1974, 29 wins. And in 1975, 40 wins, which nearly got them into the playoffs. But 2 months into the season, team star Austin Carr suffered a knee injury that led to him playing only 41 games. The Cavs ended up losing their final game of the season to the Kings, 94-95, leaving them with one less win than the Houston Rockets. But the 1975 season did show improvement, and would be the foundation for which the Cavs could improve upon next season. Taken with the first overall pick in the 1971 draft, there were high hopes for Austin Carr coming out of college. The 6'4" shooting guard was the unanimous 1971 National Player of the Year, and he set a number of records during his time at Notre Dame. Against Ohio in 1970, Carr scored 61 points, the NCAA tournament record for most points in a game. He also holds the most field goals made in a game, as well as attempts. His average of 50 points per game in 7 NCAA playoff games has yet to be topped. He was an offensive threat in every sense of the word, and had real Hall of Fame potential. But then he got hurt. During the 1971 preseason, Carr broke his foot. He missed the first month, and then upon making his return, he was sidelined once again due to a foot injury. Despite missing nearly half the season, when he was on the court, Carr was great. His averages of 21.2 points, 3.4 assists, and 3.5 rebounds earned him a spot on the 1972 All-Rookie First Team. With his health back for the 72-73 season, Carr put up 20.5 points and 4.5 rebounds, and by his third season, Carr made the 1974 All-Star Game with 21.9 points, 3.8 assists, 3.6 rebounds, and 1.1 steals. But his surgery in 1975 would put an end to his short-lived prime, and it would make him accept a new role on the team in 1976. By 1976, only one player from the Cavs' inaugural season was still on the roster, the 6'5" shooting guard / small forward, Bingo Smith. Bingo was known for his great shooting ability, and if he had only been born 10 years later, a lot of his 2-point attempts probably would have been turned into 3-point attempts. Bingo had seen his role on the Cavs change in almost each of his 5 seasons. In 71, he was the shooting guard. In 72, he was the small forward. In 73, he was Austin Carr's backup. In 74, he was back to starting at small forward, and in 75, Bingo became the team's #1 option. In 1972, the Cavs acquired Jim Clemens from the Lakers, a 6'3" second-year point guard who had been on the famous 72 Lakers. Clemens, a left-handed player who was given the nickname Mr. Smart, was an intense student of the game, the classic archetype of a leader on the court and in the locker room. He was also a great perimeter defender, and the 1976 season would go on to be the best of his career, with 12.2 points, 5.2 assists, and 4.3 rebounds. The 1973 draft brought the Cavs a 6'9" power forward named Jim Brewer. Taken with the second overall pick, Brewer was the first real power forward that the Cavs had. He was the team's best defender, often having to guard the opposing team's best player, and he knew how to box out and get plenty of boards. In 1976, he averaged 11.5 points, a team-leading 10.9 rebounds, 1.1 steals, and 1.1 blocks. Another piece from the 74-75 season was Clarence Walker, better known by his nickname, Foots Walker. Footsy was sort of like Nate Tiny Archibald. He stood at just 6 feet tall, but he was fast and a heck of a dribbler. 2 crucial trades in the 74-75 season brought in Jim Chones and Dick Snyder to Cleveland. Chones was a 6'11" center who had spent his first 2 seasons in the ABA, and his first season in the NBA would be with the Cavs. He was an excellent pickup, since Chones could score in more ways than a lot of other centers could back in the 70s. There really wasn't an area of the game that he was weak at. Statistically speaking, he was the Cavs' best player in 76, as he averaged a team-high 15.8 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.1 blocks. Dick Snyder was a 6'5" shooting guard who had been in the NBA for almost a decade at this point, but he had only made the playoffs twice, in his rookie and sophomore seasons, when he was a member of the Hawks who didn't get much playing time. In late 1969, Snyder would get traded to the Seattle Supersonics, and this is where he would produce the best numbers of his career, specifically 1971, when he averaged 19.4 points and 4.3 assists on 53.1% shooting from the field. Snyder was sort of a silent leader for the team, as he had a high basketball IQ and was another great shooter, not just in terms of making field goals, but choosing them. Snyder very rarely took a bad shot, and this stability led to the team calling him Mr. Steady. In addition to Snyder, the Sonics also gave the Cavs a 1974 first-round pick, which would eventually turn into Campy Russell. Campy Russell was a 6'8" small forward who had been an All-American at the University of Michigan. He was a great off-the-dribble scorer, but also had humility and was unselfish. He would go on to make the 1979 All-Star Game, averaging over 20 points, and would also lead the league in three-point percentage in 1982, but in his sophomore 1976 season, he averaged 15 points and 4.2 rebounds. The Cavs starting lineup for the 75-76 season was Jim Clemens at point guard, Dick Snyder at shooting guard, Bingo Smith at small forward, Jim Brewer at power forward, and Jim Chones at center. Off the bench, you had Austin Carr backing up Dick Snyder, and Footsie Walker backing up Clemens. Rounding out the rest of the roster was Luke Whitty, Steve Patterson, John Lambert, point guard Butch Beard, and Eric Fernston. It's truly sad how injuries killed Carr's career so early on, but to his credit, Carr accepted the position that he was in due to his body, and gladly took on his new role as the team's sixth man, and he played that role to near perfection. The 1975 Cavs were a much better team than their record suggested, so in 1976, many people around the league were expecting them to finally have their breakout season, but it didn't seem that way at first. Despite the optimism heading into the season, the Cavs were 6-10 after their first 16 games, but that's when the Cavs made a move that would drastically change the trajectory of the season. In a trade that sent Eric Fernston and Steve Patterson to the Chicago Bulls, the Cavs were able to acquire Hall of Famer and Ohio native Nate Thurmond, as well as Rowland Garrett. At this point in his career, Thurmond was 34 years old, and coming off an underwhelming and disappointing season with the Bulls. He was past his prime. In fact, in 1976, Thurmond only averaged 4.6 points and 17.4 minutes per game. But what he lacked in statistical production, he made up for in veteran leadership and deep playoff experience, something that was sorely lacking on this squad. According to the Cavs players and staff, Thurmond's presence in the locker room had a big effect on the mentality and culture of the team. On December 19, 1975, the Cavs were playing an away game against the Phoenix Suns, and were taking a beating. Even though I did say the trade had a major effect on the trajectory of the Cavs season, it wasn't that way right off the bat. Going into this game, the Cavs were 13-14, so after heading to the locker room at halftime, the Cavs all hung their heads in frustration. But that's when Nate Thurmond came in and said,
"We were down by 20 at halftime." And I'm like, "Man, what's going on here?" And he said, "Look, you guys don't realize how good you are. You got to stop playing like to lose and start having confidence and play to win." Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that little speech right there did it. And we never looked back from that point on.
The Cavs then went on to come back and win the game in double overtime. Now, the Cavs didn't have to play Jim Chones 40 minutes a game and risk tiring out their best player. Instead, Thurmond could be the piece who could make it so that the Cavs had 48 minutes of good center play each night. Chones was their offensive anchor, while Thurmond was their defensive anchor. Not to mention, Thurmond would mentor the young Chones and give him advice about defensive positioning and how to play certain guys. In the words of Chones, "Just by watching Nate, I was able to pick up how to guard certain players, guys who used to kick my butt. Now they were afraid of me. I'd watch what Nate would do, his demeanor, how he passed the ball, how he stretched out his game. He didn't try to do everything in the first few minutes. He just knew how to play. He was an old school center who had a lot of pride, who believed in rebounding and blocking shots. He ran the floor, he set picks, he just had experience I didn't have. So he was perfect for me because I could measure myself by him. I had a chance to practice with him every day, and I watched him and learned a lot from him." Although he played only 2 seasons for the Cavs, the organization still retired Nate Thurmond's number 42 jersey, which should really tell you how highly people thought of him. While the 1976 Cavs were not the best team in the NBA, they were probably the most deep. They had no all-stars, but 7 players averaged double-digit points. A big reason for the team's depth and chemistry was Bill Fitch. This was a guy who would spend hours watching film until his eyes were literally blood red, film of teams he had already played 10 times before. Fitch didn't believe in a system that relied on 1 or 2 stars dominating each game. He believed in an unselfish approach, and leaned into one of his team's greatest strengths: friendship. There were no egos and there was no animosity on the Cavs. These guys liked each other. The Cavs thrived in a half-court setting. Their off-ball movement was incredibly good, but if a team was shutting them down or a play fell apart, the Cavs had Bingo Smith and Campy Russell, who were able to create their own shots in one-on-one scenarios. Defensively, the Cavs held opponents to an average of 99.2 points per game, the second best average in the league, but they also finished with the 3rd best offensive rating in the league. Aside from their chemistry, another reason for their success may have been the Cleveland fans. From every source I've read about this team, every one of them made mention of how wild and excited the fans were watching the Cavaliers finally succeed. Most of the fans weren't even particular fans of the sport. Despite having success in the early ABL, basketball wasn't that popular in Cleveland. Cleveland was football country, and all these new fans that were now coming to Cavs games were mostly Browns fans. By the end of the 75-76 season, the Cavs had a win-loss record of 49-33, the 3rd best in the league. Bill Fitch ended up winning the 1976 Coach of the Year, and Jim Clemens and Jim Brewer both made second-team All-Defense. For the first time in franchise history, the Cavs had earned a playoff berth. Thanks to them winning 4 of their last 5 games, including a 101-92 win over the Celtics, the Cavs had won the Midwest Division over the Washington Bullets, who finished 48-34. As it just so happens, the Cavs' first playoff opponent were the 3rd-seeded Bullets in the 1976 East semifinals. In the regular season, the Cavs had beaten the Bullets 4 out of 6 times, but this was the Cavs' first ever playoff appearance, and their players had very little postseason experience. Conversely, the Bullets had much more experience, and they had just added Hall of Famer Dave Bing to their roster in that off-season. But they were also garnering a bit of a reputation for folding under pressure. After all, they were fresh off an appearance in the 1975 finals, where they were the huge favorites, but ended up getting swept by the Warriors in 4 games. That postseason experience ended up being the deciding factor in Game 1. Washington took Game 1 100-95, but the Bullets had gotten hot early on. At halftime, they led 56-35, but the Cavs played much better in the second half, and the fact that they almost came back from a 20-point deficit gave the Cavs the confidence they needed for the remainder of the series. Game 2 was more toned down, and back and forth by comparison. By the end of the 3rd quarter, both teams were tied 63 points apiece. With 1:21 left in the game, Jim Chones hit a turnaround 10-foot shot to make the score 79-76. Then, after Dave Bing missed a shot, Jim Clemens hit a 20-foot shot with 1:02 left on the clock. The Bullets brought the ball up the court and then called a timeout with 51 seconds left. After some violations were called and possessions changed, the Cavs got the ball back with 6 seconds left and called timeout. Enter miracle number 1. Fitch told Bingo Smith to take a shot anywhere he could get it, and after getting the inbound pass from Clemens, Bingo hit a 25-foot shot to put the Cavs up 80-79. An Elvin Hayes miss secured the win for Cleveland. For Game 3 back at the Richfield Coliseum in Ohio, 21,061 fans came to support the Cavs, an NBA playoff record at the time for attendance. The Cavs played great defense in Game 3. In fact, they played great defense throughout the entire series, and so did the Bullets. But Game 3 was the Cavs' best outing, as they won 88-76. The Bullets won Game 4 back at the Capitol Center, evening up the series with a 109-98 victory. At Richfield in Game 5, the Cavs topped their own attendance record by playing to a crowd of 21,312 people. The game was once again very back and forth, but Cleveland did have a lead of 76-71 at the end of the 3rd, and a big reason for that was Dick Snyder, who had had a pretty passive series up to this point. Right after a Cavs timeout, Snyder hit a shot from the top of the key to put the Cavs up 90-89, with 50 seconds left. But then Phil Chenier answered with a shot to give Washington a 91-90 lead. A Cleveland turnover put the ball in the hands of Elvin Hayes, who was fouled by Campy Russell with 7 seconds left. Hayes missed both of his free throws, giving the Cavs a chance to steal the game. And steal the game, they did. Enter miracle number 2. Snyder inbounded the ball to Bingo Smith, who took an off-balanced jumper that missed by a mile. Bingo himself said that the shot was a pass, but his teammates think very differently. Regardless, Bingo's airball ended up in the hands of Jim Clemens, who tried a reverse bank shot tip-in. The ball sat on the rim for seconds, but it eventually rolled downwards into the basket just as the buzzer sounded off. The Cavs got off to a rocky start in Game 6. In the first, the Bullets outscored them 30-19, and near the end of the third, they were down by 10, before Jones and Clemens cut the deficit down to 6 points. With 2:02 left in the fourth, both teams were tied 88-88, but due to relentless defense on both sides, no one was able to score for the remainder of the game, so they were going into overtime. The Bullets got hot right away, while the Cavs were held scoreless for the first 3 minutes, but the Cavs were able to break their dry spell, thanks to Austin Carr, who posted a team-high 27 points. But Elvin Hayes, who must have been pretty mad over the end of Game 5, posted 28 points, 13 rebounds, and blocked 8 shots. He was just too much for the Cavs. So now, we arrive at April 29th, 1976. Game 7 at the Richfield Coliseum. It was one of the loudest nights in Cavs history. Hours before the game even started, fans were screaming and chanting, "We want the Cavs! We want the Cavs!" The Cavs were playing to another NBA playoff attendance record of 21,564 fans. Reportedly, when Bill Fitch was giving a pregame talk, the vibrations from the crowd made his chalkboard fall off its stand, and during the game, the Cavs had to move their timeout huddles away from the bench because they literally couldn't hear each other. With how both teams were playing defense, a 6-point lead really felt like a 15-point lead. With 1:38 left in the game, Dick Snyder, who was looking to redeem himself after a Game 6 performance of 3 points, rebounded his own 12-foot miss and was able to put the Cavs up 85-83. Elvin Hayes was then fouled, and in a repeat of Game 5, he missed his 2 free throws, but Chenier was able to hit a 15-foot wing shot a few possessions later, tying the game 85-85, with 24 seconds left. The Cavs called timeout. After Clemens dribbled around a bit, the Cavs called another timeout with 9 seconds left. The play Fitch drew up was to get the ball to Dick Snyder on the left side, 20 feet out, but instead of Chenier as the defender, Wes Unseld came out to guard Snyder. With Unseld all over him, the jump shot play was clearly not going to work, so Snyder had to improvise. Enter Miracle 3. He dribbled left, switched to his right hand, and then threw up a one-handed floater. By Snyder's own admission, it was a prayer shot. But it was a prayer that was answered, because the bank shot put the Cavs up 87-85 with 4 seconds left. From half court, Unseld inbounded the ball to Hayes, who fell down and got the ball tipped away from him by Snyder, but Chenier was there to grab it. He rose up, fired his own prayer shot, and missed. The Cavs had just won their first ever playoff series. The Cavs had gone from the laughingstock of the league to a team that was now setting playoff attendance records. They were moving on to the East Finals, and their opponent were the Boston Celtics. The Celtics had won 54 games in the regular season, and had won 3 of their 5 matchups against the Cavs. But John Havlicek had missed 3 games in the Celtics series against the Braves due to a foot injury, so they were a little less intimidating than a fully healthy Celtics team. But the Cavs caught their own case of the injury bug on Tuesday, May 4th, 1976, 2 days before the opening game of the East Finals. The Cavs were practicing in the Coliseum, and the players were running up and down the court. But suddenly, Jim Jones stopped running. In fact, he started limping on the court. Most of the guys there thought he must have strained something. But after taking an x-ray, one of the team's physicians discovered a stress fracture in Jones's foot. It was a freak injury. Jones hadn't made contact with anyone. But now, the Cavs were without their starting center for the entire East Finals. Bill Fitch knew the team was in trouble. Nate Thurmond was going to have to play 37 minutes per game against a peak Dave Cowens. Jones's presence was sorely missed in the East Finals. The front court of Dave Cowens and Paul Silas was already tough to go against on its own. But when you're missing your starting center, yeah, it really messed with the team's rotation. To the Cavs' credit, they didn't go down without a fight. They had actually tied the series 2 games apiece. But in Game 5, Thurmond was whistled for a controversial 6th foul on Dave Cowens with 5:03 left in the game. Until his death, Thurmond believed that this series was rigged against the Cavs. Earlier that same day, on May 16th, the Suns had just beaten the Warriors to earn a spot in the NBA Finals. According to Thurmond, a potential finals matchup of Phoenix and Cleveland didn't seem that appealing to the NBA, especially at this point in the league's history. And, to be honest, the guy has a point. So the urban legend is that the refs won Game 5 for the Celtics to appease CBS. The Cavs ended up losing Game 5, 94-99, and Game 6, 87-94, ending the season known as the Miracle of Richfield.